So we're going to start our second episode, and we're going to look at the 5 levels of leadership. So let's just do a quick review. In the first episode, we talked about the difference between a manager and a leader. A manager simply manages expectations based on what people want, whereas a leader sets expectations on what they know God is looking for. And I think that's really key. And we talked about the 3 kind of laws of the levels that we're going to look at. The first one is self-leadership. You need to be able to lead yourself before you lead others. Then we looked at servant leadership. You're going to need to you're going to need to follow others. So as we humble ourselves, God gives us position. And then we looked at centered leadership, this concept of having that center, that core value of why you lead, so that you're not shaken by everyone's opinions and whether it's popular at the time or how well it's going or how badly it's going. But now we're going to look at the 5 levels. Now, I really love this book. It's by a guy called John Maxwell. I would say there's probably about 5 books that have really shaped my ministry, and this is one of them. So I really, really recommend it. So a lot of what I'm going to be sharing is based on this today. In the next episode, I'm taking some of this material and I'm doing a couple of things. One is I'm adding a biblical case study to it. Secondly, I'm adding some practical tips. And in the third episode, I'm going to be really unpacking a template. So how you can basically take a template wherever you're going, whoever you're leading, and apply it. So we're looking at the Developing Your Leader Within You by John Maxwell and the 5 levels. So we talked about David, and David grew as a leader to this incredible guy who his wish had become other people's commands. How did that start? Well, all leadership starts at positional leadership. Positional leadership is based on rights. Essentially, you're put into a position and people pretty much have to do what you're saying because you have a title. David was given position. In 1 Samuel 16 verse 13, so Samuel took the horn of oil and anointed him in the presence of his brothers, and from that day on the Spirit of the Lord came powerfully upon David. Samuel then went to Ramah. A couple of things to notice here. One is that when you're given position, it's important it's done in front of people. You know, if anybody ever asks you to do something or lead, you need to make sure that other people know you've been given that authority. I remember when a group of pastors in Manchester laid hands on me and gave me authority on the behalf of all these churches to go into schools. I was given that authority. The Jews have this concept of shmika, the authority to speak and bring new ideas, and anybody with shmika has to have had 2 people with shmika already lay hands on them. So authority has to be passed on. The other things just really notice about this, I think, is that when David's given this authority, it doesn't mean he thinks, right, I now go and boss everybody around. He waited patiently for the Lord. So he wasn't yet to be king. He'd been anointed, but there was a gap between that and being king. And in that time, he served Saul. And Saul was not a great leader to David. At one point, he threw a spear, I think it was, at David, and David dodged it. Actually, there's some historical concept to say that when that happened, there was some kind of law that said if somebody did that to you, you were then freed from the bondage of serving them or being a slave to them. But David continued to serve. He continued to speak well of Saul. He didn't usurp authority. So we take this position, we're given this position, but like any gift, you have to embrace it, you have to take hold of it. And we're going to look at what that looks like in the next episode. But some of the benefits, or some of the things you'll notice if you take on positional leadership are this. What can you expect? Well, first of all, people will gain confidence in you. At this level, when you walk in and you do your job well, people will gain confidence in you. Secondly, people will know their role. If you're at this level of leadership, you will have people who know what they're supposed to do. They'll know what their job is. And thirdly, people will do what they have to do, but they won't do much more. They'll do what you have the right to ask them to do, because that's what they signed up for. But they may not do much more than that. So positional leadership is the lowest form of leadership, but it's also the foundation of leadership. You can't skip it, as we'll talk about later. You can't think, well, I don't want to do all my job. I don't like my job. I don't want to do aspects of it. I'm just going to try and do other things. Foundationally, you have to do the holistic part of your job, the full part of your job. So what's the second level of leadership? The second level of leadership is permissional. And permissional leadership is based on relationship. And Jonathan made a covenant with David because he loved him as himself. Jonathan took off the robe he was wearing and gave it to David, along with his tunic and even his sword, his bow, and his belt. Great leaders, it's been said, get hurt but keep on loving. And I think that's key. You have to have love for the people you lead. Now, I once famously on Pais, as some of you will remember, went round the room and said who I loved and who I didn't love. Because some people, I knew them really well, and some people had joined pretty much quite recently. So you may have different levels of love, but you have to have genuine care for the people that you are leading, because people are going to figure out if you're just using them. So there has to be, and if you don't naturally have that, it's asking the Lord to give that to you. Some people are easier to lead than others. Some people are easier to love than others. But when you're doing this, and again in the third episode, we'll look at how to do this well. When you're caring for people you lead, when you have a relationship with them, there's some great things to expect. One of them is that people will do more than they have to do. So we saw that in the story. People will do more than they have to do. They will do what they have to do, but they may do more. We used to run a youth ministry, and we lived quite a long distance away from the building where the youth ministry happened. And me being me, sometimes I'd forget to close the door and lock up. And to go all the way back it's like a long trip to go all the way back, check the door, and come back again. So on a few occasions, I would just call someone who was close and say, hey, would you mind nipping round to the church and just checking the doors locked? And people said yes. People are good. People are kind. People do more than they have to. But they need to know you're not just using them. You genuinely care about them. People will be flexible, open to change, and your mistakes. You're going to make a mistake as leader. You're going to make lots of mistakes as a leader, to be honest. And people are going to be more open to your mistakes. They're going to be more forgiving about your mistakes if you show that you care for people. You have a genuine interest for them. And again, I'll say it one more time. There's different levels. You know, for instance, I have 3 teams that I kind of lead. There's the specialist directorship team at Global. There's all the different national directors that are another team. And then there's my global board as well. So there's only so much love you can have for people. You can only be stretched so far. You have to work that out. Jesus was the same. He had the 1, the 3, the 12, the 70. There were different levels of relationship he had. The key part is no matter what level, you have a genuine care for people. Thirdly, people will want to be together, but little more. So at this level, what happens is you create a good atmosphere. People have fun. People care for each other, but they may not actually achieve much. There are probably churches like this. I've been parts of churches like this where it's a great atmosphere. People love being together, very family orientated, very relational, but the church isn't making a difference in the community. Nothing's really happening. They're not advancing. They're not growing. People aren't getting saved. There's no real breakthrough happening, but people like being there. People like being together. So people need more than that, I think. And there's a third level of leadership. And the third level of leadership is production. And that's based on results. At this level, the leader is seeing things happen. There's momentum. Whatever mission Saul sent him on, David was so successful that Saul gave him a high rank in the army. This pleased all the troops and Saul's officers as well. When the men were returning home after David had killed the Philistine, the women came out from all the towns of Israel to meet King Saul with singing and dancing, with joyful songs and with timbrels and lyres. As they danced, they sang, Saul has slain his thousands, but David his tens of thousands. It's interesting because that really annoyed Saul. He got quite upset about this. His insecurities really came to the surface. But that was David. David was a person who had success. He saw results. And we see that when he leads Israel, they have great success. There are some great results that are happening. He's a man who does a lot. I think the Mishnah says this, that David was not only a warrior, but also a wise and energetic ruler. Shortly after the accession, he anointed no less than 90,000 officials. So he delegated, he got things done. We think of David as a lovely guy who had, a little harp and sang, and that's true. He was also a warrior, but he was also quite administrative as well. He was a delegator, he was organised. He learnt the skills he needed to have. My guess is he probably most enjoyed, being a creative type, music. But again, he did the bits he maybe didn't like to do, maybe the administrative bits, because that's what the job required to be successful. So at this part of the journey, what we see is this. People will come together for a purpose. People will want to get things done. They'll meet together and they'll talk about how can we achieve this, how can we achieve that. There'll be energy. People will be success orientated, not problem orientated. I remember the first time I ever noticed this was many, many years ago in the early days of Pais. And normally I would go on vacation, come back and have a day just to kind of fix anything that happened during the 2 weeks I was away. I remember once walking in the office, walked upstairs, and we had a small team there at the time, probably about 3 people that were leading Pais. I said, "Hi guys, I'm back." They went, "Oh, hi Paul," and just carried on working. And I went to the key guy, the guy who's like my right-hand man, said, "So how's it gone?" He said, "Have you had any problems?" He said, "Oh yeah, this happened, but Karen fixed that. And all this happened, but I was able to deal with that. And then that happened, but whoever it was sorted that out." I said, "Okay, so what do I need to do?" And he was like, "No, nothing." So I remember going in my office and thinking, what do I do today? But that's the benefit, I think, of being in that situation, is that people want to fix because they see success and they want success. They're not focused on problems anymore. They're focused on, we want this, and the problem comes up, let's fix this because we don't want to lose the opportunity of seeing this happening. And particularly with things that we do on Pais, reaching young people, it's the difference between not just life and death, but eternal life and death. We don't want to be concentrating on our problems and our worries when there's big things out there that we need to fix. Because, to be honest, our problems don't compare to those who have problems maybe similar to us but don't have Christ and don't have a future in him. So we have to get our act together. And that means someone like me has to get my act together. I need to make sure I'm helping people be successful. And finally, people will experience positive momentum but little more. The problem with this level is you can have a great driven leader, but it can be all based around that person. There are ministries like that where it's all based around the charismatic preacher, the charismatic church leader. And while that person's in place, everything's great, there's momentum, but not much more can happen outside of that person's gifting or personality or drivenness. So what's the 4th level of leadership? Personnel, reproduction. This is when a leader makes leaders. Such were the exploits of Benaiah, son of Jehoiada. He too was as famous as the 3 mighty warriors. He was held in greater honor than any of the 30, but he was not included among the 3. And David put him in charge of his bodyguard. So yes, David was this great, driven, charismatic personality, but he made other leaders. The 30 men were mighty warriors. He was a warrior who produced warriors. And this is where things really start to happen. When a leader creates other leaders, things can multiply. Basically, we're back to discipleship. When we reproduce what God has done in us, in other people, things really start to happen. And some of the benefits, some of the expectations you can have are quality people become leaders. Now, some people may still disappear. Some people may not be happy because maybe you're really stretching them and challenging them and they don't like that. But quality people, people who want what you want, and if what you want is what God wants, those people will start to become leaders. Quality people stay because they can attribute their growth to you. Maybe not like you directly, but maybe to the environment or the culture. There was a famous CEO of an American company who said, I can't believe that people will hire my staff and then put them in a different environment and expect them to function at the same level without the same resources. And so if we as a team work well, we have many leaders amongst us, then all of us are going to perform better than we would do when we're isolated and on our own. So quality people stay because they attribute their growth to you. And quality people send their people to you but a little more. So quality people will say, oh, let's send people to that church, that organization. I want people to be around Robert or Fogo. I need to get people to Ellie because I know if they're with them, they're going to grow. They're going to develop them in their skills. So on Pais, we have churches and organizations that send people to us because they think Pais will help them grow in the things of God and in their confidence, which is great. But that's all. There's another level. There's more than that. So let's look at the final level, which John Maxwell calls pinnacle, and is respect. This is very special, I think. As Jesus entered Jerusalem on a colt, the people said, Hosanna, blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. Blessed is the coming kingdom of our father David. Hosanna in the highest heaven. At some point, and we'll talk about how this happens in the final episode when we look at the template, at some point, someone who's been practicing those 4 levels reaches this place where the way Maxwell puts it is they become bigger than the thing they lead. The kind of biblical way of saying this is that their branches go over the wall. So yes, they lead this church, but actually other people come to them and invite them to come and teach them what they've learned in that church. So that in that church, they're leading that church, but their influence is wider than that church or that organization. Billy Graham was a great evangelist. He had an organization, but he's probably not known for his organization. He's known for who he is. He became iconic. You know, presidents and kings and queens would invite them to speak to them about his faith. Even what we do, we can be in that situation where we're running a team, where we're doing maybe, it could be accounting, but the way that we're doing it, or it might be training, or the way we're doing that. Other people will come to us and invite us to go and speak to their organizations or speak to their churches. We do that now with Pais with the masterclasses. We travel around and the things that we've done internally, we take out. Now, my personal opinion, I think it's good to have not leave the organization just to do those things. I was talking to somebody yesterday and we were talking about the fact that, or I was talking about the fact that sometimes I've seen people who've grown something, but that's the difficult bit. It's the management of something. You know, I don't like managing. I can do it, but I don't like it. I love to teach. I like teaching. So in my dream world, I would pass on the management, leave the organization, and go and, you know, buy a little house on a beach somewhere and just travel teaching. But what I've noticed is quite quickly I would lose my edge because it's us being together. It's us figuring out how do we reach communities that keeps us sharp and keeps us moving forward in our own mind and our own gifting. So when we think about these different things, I want you just to imagine what you can expect at this level. So in summary, your influence will become bigger than what you do. Your story will become symbolic of what you do. And your influence will last beyond what you do, and so much more. I want to encourage you. We need leaders. There is a leadership crisis, I think, in the world. And there's even a leadership crisis perhaps in Christianity right now. David was famous, but he came from humble beginnings. The same with you and I. We may come from humble beginnings, but there's a giant inside of you. I had a friend who was a big guy, literally. He was much taller than me, much bigger than me. He had a booming, rich voice. And I thought he was a great speaker. But there was always something odd about him. And that was that whenever he preached, he always sat on a chair and spoke quite quietly. And I never understood why. And I said to him once, mate, why did you do that? Because you have this amazing personality. If I was you, I would use that. You could, you could rally people, you could inspire people, you've got this passion. And he told me this story. He said that when he was a young man in his early 20s, when he first started preaching, He used to be like that. And then an older lady on the front row once said to him, I wish you'd calm it down a little bit, you intimidate me. And from that moment on, he sat on a chair, and I think he kind of gave up that gifting that he had. I would encourage you, don't do that. Don't be pressured, don't be held back, don't be penned back or pinned back by other people's opinions. Know what God is calling you to do, and let the giant in you rise up. Don't think, well, I can just do this. All of us could be leaders. There could be national leaders, even in this little room, because it's God who makes us big, yeah? You know, when we first started on Pais, things were, in some ways, more difficult to influence. You know, we started Pais before the internet. We started Pais before social media. There was no such thing as emails when we started Pais. Our ministry was the first ministry I knew that had a website. Most of our work in the first year or two was through phone calls and postal letters. There's an amazing chance now for you to influence the world. Incredible. And some of the restrictions are not as bad as they were. The gender restrictions, the race restrictions, in my case the class restrictions, coming from a kind of more working class background with more of a common accent, you know, years ago probably held me back. Those things don't matter quite as much nowadays. So there's a giant in you. Don't focus on your ministry. Focus on God's calling and the opportunity to influence others. And God will bless your ministry. But make it about His mission, not your ministry. So let me encourage you to download the documents, discuss the questions, and disciple others in what we have learnt.
Hello, we hope you enjoyed this episode of Livewire. Did you know we have conferences all over the world? Please email us at info@paismovement.com and we can get you connected.